part of the overall dealing with things. Maybe I'll cut out the social part. Maybe I'll cut out the um, emotional part and just start dissociating again or something just to get started again. Um, but in time, true recovery, like Manu was saying, requires all of it. So at some point, I've got to the point where no, I deal with all of it. Um, but I think that concept of skipping, my brain goes, yes, yes, please, I'd like to skip it all.
Yeah, for sure. I really relate to that too. If it's like it's flooding, it feels like that's the word that comes up a lot with like thinking about wanting to skip parts of it. Is like, well, it feels too intense and there's too much emotion around it and too much information. And I feel like that was like a big part of like my eating disorder was like the amount of like nutrition information available that was like online and trying to be like, okay, like what are the actual facts and feeling like my eating disorder really just took any information that I could get and ran with it and was like very much like led me to that place of feeling like, well, now I don't even feel able to confront this or able to like discuss it in a way because I felt so confused. But I really love tying in how much of eating disorders are social and like like the strength of community as like medicine for helping recover from an eating disorder, and also how much food is involved with social events and with like being engaged with community. So I think that it's something that like for me, like community and connection has always been a value of mine. So always coming back to that of like I want to be able to be present. And that means I have to confront that there's going to be food at events, that there's going to be people talking about emotions or bodies around me. And how do I like, yes, feel really like activated by those at times. And also how do I stay on track and remind myself that like I like do need to confront all of these parts of it so that I can stay true in my recovery. And I agree, Amanda, too, of like that quasi, like having one foot in, one foot out really wasn't an option for me of feeling like, yeah, like if I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna be completely torn all the time of like staying in that battle. If even I have one like toe in the fight of the eating disorder, like that toe will quickly become my whole body pulled back in, you know? So it's very much for me was like, okay, yes, I wanted to, yeah, be able to avoid all of those things, right? And not have to confront them. But for me, I think that's been like the most like fulfilling part of the process too is being able to say like, yeah, I'm willing to take on and challenge each of those parts of it and work with those things to become like friends with them. You know, like the same way I talk about like grief and grief being like a friend of mine now because it's going to be part of my life. And the same with like food's going to be a part of my life and becoming friends with it, becoming friends with the emotional sides, with knowing that it has to be part of my social structure. And really trying to incorporate it into a way of saying like, yeah, we're all on the same team in this, and I'm willing to engage in the fight this way rather than dipping my toe back in to that quasi space.
I love having like both sides of the coin of like Otter, like, okay, sometimes I just need to do one thing. And I was like, no, we have to do all the things, otherwise it's not going to work. Because also I want to acknowledge that like there's so much recovery fatigue. And I think I was stuck in like the binge restrict cycle for many years. And we can get in this space of like, okay, if I'm not doing recovery perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all. I'm just going to be like, F it. I'm just going to do all my behaviors and maybe I'll start on Monday or like the first of the month or the new year. I'll do it perfectly then. Because I think this disorder like brings in a lot of perfectionist tendencies. So if I'm not doing recovery perfectly and addressing my relationship with my body and exercise and food all at one time, I'm just not going to do it. I'm overwhelmed. I can't do this. So I also want to acknowledge like while we need to work on all those things eventually, like picking one, like Otter said, to work on and stick with is really, really important because you're still working, you're still doing the exposure therapy, you're still sitting down and nourishing your brain so that you have the energy to work on those other things.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. It's like even if it's just on one hand, you want to be really honest with yourself about kind of whether you're kind of what comes up for me around this question, I guess, is there were times definitely early in my recovery, and I'm thinking particularly like in the first couple of years where I got to a point where, and it was new because I hadn't always been there. I really did want to recover. I didn't want to be stuck in it anymore. but I really didn't want to do what it took to recover. I really had no, and so I was like, I want treatment. I just don't want to eat this meal plan. And it was like, and I see this a lot in my clients, like desperately want treatment, desperately want support, but then hitting this block of like, but support is not coming in the form that I want. And do you know what I mean? There's just and sometimes sometimes the support really does need to be adapted and all of that stuff, but it's hard to kind of figure out what of this is like my illness pushing back because I'm not trying to do something really uncomfortable and it feels really real. And like, I've got all these reasons why, this intolerance and this, the care isn't being individualized, blah, 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 blah. And they all feel extremely convincing in your own head. But there were, looking back in hindsight, I can kind of go, oh yeah, it was really just like my eating disorder putting up a massive fight because I was scared, because it hurt, because it was uncomfortable, because it physiologically was uncomfortable. And I would say you can't, whether it's a restrictive eating disorder, whether it's binging, whether it's purging, you can't skip the eating part. It's the hardest part about, well, it's not the hardest part, but it's a very difficult part about this illness. It's not like you can abstain from having a relationship with food. It really does require a daily, multiple times a day interaction with the very thing that's causing distress or, at the heart of distress. So it's super difficult.
I'm seeing this comment in the chat around like wanting and not wanting it in the same like breath. And I think that's something that I experienced so early on. And I still, when I talk with people in our community, it comes up so frequently of like, I want my brain to feel better. I want to not be in this war anymore. And also like, yes, like the same thing of like the eating disorder really putting up a fight. And especially when there is that challenge, I think, of the person's like actual voice, like the individual voice coming through of saying like, I really want my brain to just like not feel like it's on fire anymore and not feel like there's this like tug of war happening all day. And also the doing the parts of it, like getting the medicine in, right? Like I do view food as like part of the medicine of healing from an eating disorder, and being able to like engage with it in that way also takes our brains like being able to have that neuroplasticity and flexibility to viewing it that way, which if we're stuck in those cycles can be really hard for us to even be able to see that as an option of like, okay, I can view this as medicine and this is part of my healing, just the same way that if I had a broken arm, I would go and get a cast put on it. It's the same thing of like getting care for it and getting treatment. But yet when it's something that our brain has also convinced us is like the enemy or something that we only engage with for comfort or punishment, like these like cycles and like the associations that our brain like develops with it through the eating disorder, like peeling it back and getting it back to that place of like, oh, this is actually the medicine, and engaging with this in this way is actually going to help heal me, feels like such a difficult thing to try to explain and try to like conceptualize when the brain is in a place of like, no, we can't. This is the scariest thing that we could do. So, and it like, yeah, it does feel like the most, which is why I think that recovery feels so difficult and unattainable for so many folks, is because it feels like we're trying to engage with the thing that our brains have convinced us is what we're at a war with. So very, very like relatable of experience of like the push and pull of wanting and not wanting, the recovery, the work, all of those things.
I have a question following from that. I assume then, and we know that recovery is not a linear process. It's not like an end point that you get to and you're like, ta-da! But so I'm not gonna assume that you're at an end point, but I assume you've had periods where that has gotten better. Like you've had that like push-pull, resistance, friction, charge, and then maybe periods where it eased. What was that like for you? Like what helped? What did it feel like? How long did it take? What was that process like for you?
I would say for me, what really helped was connection with people and realizing that food holds this, or it used to when I was growing up, this really special place with connecting I think of connecting with my dad actually. And so during my eating disorder, I was just like not eating with my family, and I would not go to events like Otter said and just isolate. And now having like those moments of ease and not being so afraid of certain foods, it's so beautiful that I can go home and my dad can make me pancakes, and he makes like a certain shape and I have to guess the shape he tried to make before I eat it. And it's this like beautiful like connection that we have. We always shared this love of food together and exploring and play and joy. And I think getting some of that back really helped me get over the hump a little bit. And of course, going back over the hump and going back over, but getting over it a little bit if I'm connecting it with other people and sharing that experience and realizing that there's a lot of play with food, and it can be a beautiful thing to connect with other people. And if I focus more on that connection piece, and I'm like, okay, I am building this relationship with my dad who's not going to always be here. I can do that. And like, even if like XYZ happens with my body and I get panicked and like, I don't know, even if I like gain weight or what, it doesn't matter because I have this beautiful thing with my dad. So I think the connection, community, and family piece that food allows us helped me ease into some of those like really hard foods that I had put some moral value on.
I think a huge change came when I started um, being able to see that my brain was doing multiple things. I think the first time I heard something like that was, um, I'm angry and happy at the same time. And I'm like, no, when they ask you how you're feeling, you're supposed to pick one, right? And of course, if you've been doing this long enough, you're like, no. And I got to the point where they're like, how are you feeling? I'm like confused. They're like, what does that mean? I'm like, because I'm feeling like 10 different things at the same time. Um, and then that shifted into, wait, my brain can do the same thing. My thoughts can do the same thing. I can have conflicting thoughts. And technically, they're not conflicting, they're just different perspectives. So going back to Lydia's idea about being healed, um, I let's say break my leg and I get a cast and I have to be careful on it. I can't. Doctor's like, I don't need you walking. If you are, you have to use the crutches. And then I look behind me and there's a tiger. And what does my brain say? Run, run fast. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to run, and it's going to injure me further. It's going to make it get more difficult. Bringing this back to the perspective issue is the ability to go, okay, my brain is currently telling me I want to run and I kind of need to run. But at the same time, my brain is saying, but you can't run because you need to heal. You need to pick a behavior. You need to choose one of those. Um, and so that's when I started realizing that my brain's telling me multiple things. They're telling me you want to go to this social event because you're a social person and you love these people. And your brain is also telling you there's going to be food involved and you're not going to like it. And there's going to be a lot of judgment. And I don't want to deal with that. So, but I still have to choose, do I go or do I not go? And I realized that I was probably giving into the eating disorder perspective, the eating disorder thoughts, the eating disorder emotion when I first started. And once I realized that, wait, I get to choose which part of my brain I'm listening, which thought, which emotion, things got a lot easier. You know, I don't actually have to listen or react to every single thing my brain says.
I love that. Yeah, it's like having like your own voice in it and your own like the ability to say like, okay, I can observe that all of these things are happening and I can choose which one I have the energy, like I can put my energy towards and what outcome can that bring versus I only have one perspective to go with and I have to lean into it and that's just whatever happens is what I deal with. Very relatable. I think for me, I like really have such a clear like example still in my brain of like how my brain felt when I was in my eating disorder and the pain of like the experience of like engaging in behaviors and like how overwhelmed I felt all of the time, like because there was such like my emotions were like on the like top of my like reactivity at all times. And knowing that like when I got to treatment, I felt like a wave of relief of being told that like someone was going to have a meal plan for me. And I was like, I'm hungry. I want to eat. I want someone to like give me permission to do this. That I like feel like I really noticed quickly when I started to go through my process of like completing my meal plan, that I was able to be like, oh, my brain feels like it's slowed down so much and I can actually like be online. And I started to really see that as like a direct correlation of like I do my meal plan and then I don't burst into tears or I don't start yelling at someone or I don't, you know, scream at my mom because she told me the wrong thing that I didn't want to hear. And I can tolerate sitting at a table with foods that I was really afraid of or felt really out of control around. And my ability to connect that, I think, to my brain and really valuing my brain's ability to like hold those complexities, I think really helped me push through any time that I was like, this feels so hard and I'm at the push pull. I just tried to come back to like, I want my brain to be able to handle things like in a manner that like allow me to slow down. And I think that's what it really felt like with the eating disorder. It was like the roller coaster of like behaviors and then like the guilt and the stress and the like roller coaster of all of it, that I was like, I don't like, I can't handle being on that anymore. And I need my brain to be able to say like, yeah, we're going to maybe like speed up at times because that's how my brain and body react. And there will be times that will coast and it'll be slow, and being able to like normalize that ebb and flow instead of it being like expecting the dramatic highs and lows and like feelings of like dopamine rushes and then like lapses in dopamine, you know, like all of the things, like really slowing down and giving like a lot of credit to my brain and saying like, I'm doing this in the hardest times to keep my brain online because I really value like being able to feel like more regulated and feeling like when my brain is online that I feel much better as myself. So I feel really lucky that like I was able to make that connection quickly and that it was something that I really valued as seen as something like, all right, like I can, when those thoughts come back in at that push pull, like can I use my brain and like the fueling of it to be a strong enough motivator? And then I think from that it allowed me to be like, yeah, then I can also engage with people better. I can be more present for the people in my life, so connection feels deeper and more rich rather than me hearing that people are like, I love being around you, but in my eating disorder I was like, why? I have no value. There's nothing that I bring. I'm sitting here, I'm consumed by all my own thoughts, so I'm not even like in the space with you. And then through recovery being like, oh, I can see the value that I bring because I'm also getting value from you because it's become reciprocal instead of me feeling like a shell of myself. um, that's such an interesting thing to think about, like this process from this perspective now.
Well, I think Lydia,
Yeah.
like, I hear, oh, sorry, go ahead, Chelsea.
No,
Oh, I just hear like a lot of like in the beginning when you're starting out and you feel like maybe you can't trust your brain. Like I was scared of my brain, what it was telling me to do. Like this is really hard to do by yourself. This is really hard to do alone. And I'm grateful like I got to go to treatment and had that I could take time off work. I didn't have kiddos. I had some insurance help. Um, because that is a very safe space where like finally like I can have someone take care of me and tell me what to do because I didn't know what to do. But acknowledging that like a lot of you here listening probably like can't just go to treatment. It's a very, very big commitment. It's very expensive. There's not always access. So like, but you're here connecting. Anything you do to like not isolate and try to do this by yourself, like a lot of us are like hyper independent. We think we can just push through, but our brains need help until we can trust them again. So even now, if like at 32, I will call my mom if I have like a hard day and I'm like, I'm scared of my body. I like want to hide. I'll just outing myself to my mom, or anyone is really, really helpful. I think this is a disease it's really hard to recover from in isolation because it thrives in secrecy.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. And um I think my experience is similar, and I think in some ways, but yeah, I didn't quite have that. I don't think I was as explicitly as aware as you were of the connection between food and nourishment and food as medicine and like how I felt. But I think somewhere in me, I knew, like I went, but I remember having a period where I just had a recognition that if I continued doing things the way I was doing, nothing was going to change. It was probably just going to get worse. Like I was really clear about that. And I really didn't want to do what it took or what I was told it would take to recover, which was like meals, changes in my body, you know, these things that were just, I had absolute fear and anxiety around. And I just got to a point where I had to like I don't know what, I don't know how I kind of, but I just made a commitment to do the things that were going to scare me and just try it for a little. Like I kept coming back to I had leap and the net will appear on my wall. Like just say, and it did feel like jumping off a cliff most of the time, but like doing something that terrified me. And I will say, similar to Amanda, I was not able to do that by myself by any means. And I had had treatment, but it hadn't gotten me much past that point. And I had a friend I met at a yoga studio, and she committed to doing something that was scared her every day, and I committed to doing it. And we would go and I would eat this thing that scared me at breakfast every morning after yoga with her. And it was awful, but I realized afterwards that all of the things I was terrified hadn't come to pass and that I actually felt a little bit better. That didn't mean I had to keep doing that every day, but I did it for like a month. I think we did it the first time. And then I just made that a regular practice of like picking something that scared the Jesus out of me that I thought was going to bring all my eating disorder fears to pass, and making a point of doing it for a while and just seeing what happened. And I will say that's helped me years later into recovery because I just don't catastrophize in the same way, because the body is just a whole lot more resilient than I thought it was. It just doesn't do the things I always feared. It can, you know, it can shift and change and all those, but like the idea that I would have one meal that was going to dramatically change my body. And, you know, I learned that through practice. And so I wouldn't do that alone. I needed a like accountability buddy to do that. And it wasn't somebody who had an eating disorder. It was somebody that like had a completely different experience. So I think that if you have that kind of fear and anxiety and you know there are those things, it doesn't hurt to try it for a month. You know, you can always just go back to what you were doing. That's what I told myself. You know, you can always just go back to it. But I usually would do it, and then what Lydia spoke to, I would realize actually I felt a whole lot better, you know, and I didn't want to go back to it anymore, which was good. So there was a question that I want to get to. I really loved this question. It's so honest. I'm just going to read a part of it. I find myself getting stuck with the thought that if the eating disorder is a mental illness, why is eating enough at every meal and snack so important? Why do I have to pay attention to this? Constant attention to this. Oh my gosh, I love this. Why can't I just eat like a normal person? I mean, I can relate so much to that. Amanda, Lydia, Otter, what comes up for you around that?
I don't think there is such a thing as normal. There may be typical, but if you look at each person and how they feed themselves, I've never seen two people eat the same way, in the same manner. We have this normal thought, 3 meals a day, yada, yada, yada. But I've never seen anybody follow that, you know? And so it does come back at some point once you figure yourself out. At least I have got to a point where I tend to feed myself pretty much the same way every day. And it's probably not typical, but it's what I do to keep myself nourished. And so at the beginning, and it's very akin to what I said earlier, I can't do everything, so I'm just going to pick these 3 things to work on. And feeding ourselves, if we're not exactly in tune with it yet, it's better to listen to somebody else and say, this is one of the ways you can feed yourself and be nourished. And so at the beginning, even though it's a mental disorder, it's our mental processes that are preventing us from feeding ourselves effectively. And um, at that point, it's actually just one more thing I could take off my plate of things of having to pay attention to if I just do what my dietitian tells me to do. And then over time, go, okay, what really works for me? But at the beginning, I actually appreciated somebody saying, go do this. And even though my part of my brain was going, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that at all. In fact, my therapist at the time, when she said, what do you think about doing this? I'd be like, no. And she's like, oh, so you just need to say no before you'll go do it. And I'm like, yes. And so I would say no, and then I would go do it, recognizing that I needed to say that. It's one of those concepts where you go, I'm going to give myself permission. But to give myself permission, I had to say no first. Very weird psychology, but it is who I am.
I think what I take from that question, or what I hear from it, is this is really unfair. This disease is unfair. This recovery is unfair. Why do other people get to do whatever they want with food, and I have to make sure every meal and every snack has all these parts, and I have to be hyper vigilant, which we won't always have to be, but I still am, because I know like what makes my body feel good. And I, for a long time, was like, this is so unfair. Like these other people, they like, I would have the thought of like, they get to go on a diet because they want to lose X amount of pounds for a little bit and then go back to like being like eating whatever because they have like a normal relationship with food, but then also realizing that's not normal. And so I like had to change my perspective a little bit of being grateful for the knowledge that I have. I don't have to go on a diet anymore. I know how bad that is for bodies, and it's so stressful and it's so painful. And I know what it'll do to my brain. It'll make it really itchy. Or just like looking outside, especially in Colorado, people are doing a lot of exercise stuff. And now I come at it of like, I hope they're having a good time. I hope that they're doing it because they love it. But I used to just be like, that's really unfair. They get to go just like run around, and I can't do that anymore. But switching that perspective of like, this is really hard and unfair, and it seems like no one else has to be this hyper vigilant around food and exercise. Realizing that a lot of people are struggling, but just not struggling to the degree that we are to have all that knowledge and recovery experience, that they might always be stuck in that kind of space of going on and off of diets for a long time, having a relationship with exercise where they feel like they need to get X amount of steps and they're walking in circles to hit this goal. But we have more information, we have more knowledge, and that's really, really beautiful. I think we're going to be in a better spot than the general population that is just like succumbs to diet culture and isn't questioning any of it.
Amanda, that's really reminding me. I do a lot of education, and one of our educational presentations we have is Continuum, that has intuitive eating on one side, disordered eating in the middle, and then eating disorders on the far right side. And I always say, like, there's no bad place to be on this. This is not like we're like going into morality around this. We're just observing where we're at in this and recognizing what levels of support we might need. And a lot of folks that like, when I like bring this up, I'm like, there again is no shame, because I think a majority of people in our culture exist in the diet, like disordered eating category of like having their brains be occupied in some way around compensation, around morality with food, around disconnecting from hunger cues, seeking unrealistic body goals, all of those things. And I'm like, that's something that like it takes unlearning for us to do that work. And especially like I do view like recovery as like a gift in that way, which I know is like a very like privileged like sentence of saying like my recovery's taught me so much and I'm so grateful for it, when I know that it feels like the biggest like another battle to like overcome is like the like beginning stages of recovery. And being able to say like, no, I'm so grateful for the knowledge that I have now, and being able to say like my brain is able to like, yes, I've have enough like information to be able to say like I don't have to think about those things anymore, and I don't have to like spend my time and my energy worrying about those things. Yes, it took a lot of time for me to get here. I've been almost a decade into my recovery. So again, that's like been like years of work of saying like, yeah, like I don't prescribe to diet culture things. And when I hear people talk about like how they want to manipulate their bodies or how they think they would be more lovable if they existed in XYZ space or could take up less space vocally and verbally and emotionally, I'm like, oh, like my heart aches because I know that they are still continuing to learn that that's not the way of how they can be loved and accepted and cherished in this world, is not through those things. And I think that to me, it has been like a lot more appreciation of my knowledge and like going back to the initial question around it being like a mental illness and why is eating enough like important, and coming back to like kind of what I was talking about earlier around like I was able to see those changes with my brain of saying that like, oh, I need to eat so that my brain can be functioning in the ways that I need it to. And then so that like handling all of the other things can come into place more, and I can have the mental capacity to work through the trauma that I experienced, to work through like, yeah, being able to hold multiple perspectives at one time rather than feeling very much I have to be definitive on things and exist in these two bubbles. Otherwise, I don't exist anywhere. And really being able to like practice the distress tolerance, all of the pieces and cliche words that everyone I think like hates to hear because they feel so like, I don't know, I hate saying them sometimes, like distress tolerance. I get like a little visceral reaction of being like in treatment and being like, I'm so sick of practicing distress tolerance, and then being like, oh, this is actually a skill that I use every day in my life now, is practicing like sitting in discomfort and distress around something. It's not food and body typically anymore. It's much more around grief and other like bigger things that have evolved in my life. But the also like the energy that I had to put in to making sure that I get all of those things was really like, now in the grand scheme of my recovery, it was such a short period of time. It felt like so long at the time because I was in it, and because it felt like if I'm not doing exactly the right things, like I could go backwards. But now I'm like, oh no, I like had all of the support of my team moving through it, having my dietitian say like, this is what we're gonna do. Otter, same with me. I very much was like, absolutely not. I'm not going to do it. And then I would go and do it because like, all right, well, I'm going to like take their advice. I guess they do have a degree in this and they did specialize in eating disorders. So like maybe I should trust them. And then now I'm like, I very much feel like I eat intuitively and I feel very aligned with like my hunger cues, with what I'm needing, like satiety wise. Like I feel, yeah, like that's, it wasn't, I want to say that it's like doesn't stay as hard. It doesn't stay as, at least for me, again, my experience. I don't have to stay as focused where I'm at now because now I feel like I'm in very much like an alignment with what I need. Um, so my period of time that I had to stay dedicated to it in the grand scheme of my 10 years was probably like 3 years in the beginning of staying like really rigid on it and almost going like the opposite of like eating disorder rigidity into like recovery rigidity of like, I really want to be doing these things. Again, not saying perfection at all during that. It was very much like I had to do what I could do at those times. But trying to like put my effort in that way. And it is unfair. It's something that I don't wish upon anyone to have to go through this. And I really do have so much confidence in anyone that's brain is predisposed to an eating disorder to also be able to say like, okay, I can like actively practice unlearning these behaviors and replacing them with like healing modalities. And it's not easy. It sucks. The beginning of recovery really sucked for me too, and I really hated it. And I really had to play around with like, what if what ends up happening is better than what the eating disorder is promising, and just kind of leaning into that like, what if this is better than what I could imagine? What if I can tolerate whatever body my recovery body is? What if in the good sense, and not what if in the catastrophizing. But nourishing my brain helped me get to that place of being able to like take those in as being like realistic things rather than seeming like fantasies.
Mm. Yeah, I'm glad you latched on, Lydia, to that, the part of the question around, if this is a mental illness, then why are we spending so much time thinking about and talking about food? I so relate. I get it so much. And I think I wonder if actually flipping that and thinking about it, we have this strange distinction between mental illness and physical illness in our society, which in some ways is helpful because the experience of mental illness is really different, than having, for instance, a broken arm. Like they are experientially different. I understand why it exists, but it also, I think, one, it can be quite stigmatizing because it's sort of like, well, why can't you just, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and, will yourself out of it. So when it's considered mental illness, but also I think even for us, it can be a bit, self kind of um illusory, because the reality is every thought in your mind is emerging from a coordination of neurons firing, which require the molecules coming in your food to create the neurochemicals that allow them to fire. I mean, literally, you eat and it becomes flesh and brain and neural tissue and fire. And if you are not getting those, and perfect example is like a thiamine deficiency, which can often happen in eating disorders, can often happen in substance use disorder. It can lead to permanent memory loss. Permanent memory loss because that part of the brain deteriorates. So I'm not saying it kind of academically. I'm almost like it can be kind of a helpful thing to tell yourself in those moments of when I'm sitting down and eating, this literally is medicine. What I am putting into my body really is medicinal for my illness. Nourishing my body does have an effect on my mental health. Literally, hypoglycemia, is like low blood sugar, right? There is a measurable and experiential difference when you don't have low blood sugar versus when you do. So I think that can be really helpful to kind of self-talk in those moments. And then the other piece I think is, and I saw this in one of the comments that came up, is that like finishing meal plans like 90 to 95%, but not quite there. I do think there's also something to it's so hard when you're lacking in motivation. So you almost have to kind of, I think it's part of why so many of us have spoken about connection and community and relationships as being so important because in those moments when you don't have the motivation. But I think there's something to kind of committing to, as Otter was saying, like, well, I don't want to do what the dietitian says, but there's almost a kind of relief in it when you just go, you know what, if this is the treatment that I've been prescribed, like if it were any other illness that I don't have this kind of mental distress around, I'd probably just do what the doctor prescribed. I would take the antibiotics when he says to take the antibiotics. And so I do think there can be value in that of just going, you know what, for a little while, I'm gonna leap and hope that this net will appear that everybody keeps talking about and really not do it 90% or 95%, but really give it my all because it's my life. And there's something that's really what you're talking about is your life and it's precious. And so if you feel like this illness is eating away at it, to use a pun, I don't think it's going to hurt too much to give something different a try just for a little while, with support, with community, with peers, with clinicians, all, not by any means by yourself, but I think keeping coming back to that when you sit down and have that stupid meal that you don't want to eat, you're doing that meal is the act of treating, treating yourself, literally and figuratively, nourishing yourself, nourishing your mind, nourishing your life, planting a seed for, the life to come. That's how I think about it. Easier said than done, though, man. It's so much easier said than done.
I'm curious about y'all's perspective on, like, I think this disease is really particularly tough because there is a modicum of like taking responsibility and like making the choice to do the hard thing, but it also is a very serious disease and like mental health issue. So it's like we wouldn't blame someone for having cancer, but I feel like a lot of us get blamed, or we mostly blame ourselves, of like, why can't I just do this? Like I could make the choice to go eat or to not binge or not purge, but I feel like I used to be in a space where I'm like, I just can't, like, I can't imagine putting this in my mouth. I can't imagine not doing this behavior or doing this behavior. But eventually there was a time where I'm like, I just had to make the choice. Or sometimes with my mentees, I'm like, you just got to do it or you're going to die. Like you have to do it. So it's so tricky of like acknowledging that this is a disease and it's not your fault by any means. It's very complicated, but you do have to make some choices here. So I wonder how you all have struggled with that.
It's a tough question. I think we'll have all had different experiences recovery. So I won't say that this will be true for everyone, but I'll just speak from my experience. There was a time when I couldn't make that choice for myself. I couldn't. And I didn't want to, and I couldn't want to. I couldn't want to. I was really sick. And I was I was put into treatment against my wishes. I did not, I didn't want to be there. I was involuntarily hospitalized for a long period of time. And so I think that and I think that everybody around me was sort of like, well, why are you doing this to yourself? Like just get better. And I wanted to I wanted to be able to just get better, but I couldn't. And I couldn't I mean, I know this doesn't make sense, but I couldn't want to get better either. It was really, I was really stuck. And so I think I want to acknowledge that can happen in an eating disorder. And you may be telling yourself, well, I'm not quite there and all of that, but I know for me, my brain was extremely deteriorated and I was not at a place that I could make those choices. And being hospitalized against my wishes was awful. It was terrible. And I'm alive as, as thanks to that. And it didn't fix me, it didn't cure me, but it did get me to a point where I was physically nourished enough that I could start to have access to some choices again. And at that point, it was really, when I had those moments of clarity, trying to start to set in motion choices like asking a friend to have breakfast with me every morning for a month and hold me to this commitment that I, in a moment of insanity, told her I was going to do. You know what I mean? But looking for those little windows of openings and then getting somebody else involved. But I think I do want to like acknowledge, and I'm not saying the answer is always to involuntarily hospitalize someone, but I think that it's important to recognize that this illness is this set of illnesses can do a number on your brain. And I know in my experience looking back, there was definitely a period where I couldn't choose. And I needed external, someone else to make the choice.
Adder, I saw you unmute when Chelsea was also unmuting, so I want to give you space and then I'll share my thoughts.
I've almost forgotten the question because I got caught up in what Chelsea was saying and agreeing so much. I knew what my answer was, but I don't know if this is the answer to the question, which is mental disorders are so misunderstood. We know when you go to a doctor and you have a broken arm, the solution is pretty universal. Got to reset it, we got to stabilize it, don't use it for a while. Nobody questions if that's the right answer because it's fairly straightforward. But mental disorders, we recognize that even some of the things that the eating disorder field was saying 20 years ago is kind of harmful today. And I'm not saying all physical disorders are easy to understand. For example, if you have lupus, well, I don't know what the solution is, and most doctors don't either. They're still testing and trying things out, and it's probably individual, which is kind of like an eating disorder. What works for me probably won't work for someone else. And so that concept of just trying, just putting things in place, saying I'm going to eat breakfast with somebody for a month, and realizing in day 2 that was really stupid, you know, and your brain going, I'm not going to do that, and your friends calling you, going, where are you, you know? But just taking a chance and trying something new. And at the beginning, we don't do it. It goes back to the last question about if this is a mental disorder, why are we talking about physical behaviors? If we could actually examine our, lay down on the couch with your therapist every time you eat something and go, how did that feel? You probably, start to figure out your mental disorder a little bit faster. But like Chelsea said, I don't have the wherewithal to examine it every day, every minute. I'm lucky to see my therapist once a week, and they're like, well, what happened on Tuesday? You're like, I don't know, it's Friday. How do I know what happened on Tuesday? I know what happened this morning, you know, and that's the dynamic of, I think, of mental disorders is they're not well understood. We don't understand ourselves very well. And the wherewithal, we're just not nourished or even educated or practiced in looking at ourselves. The one thing in my practice that helped me dramatically is meditation, which is slow down, watch your brain, see what your brain's doing. If you could do that all the time, man, we'd learn so much. But boy, I can barely sit down for 5 minutes and meditate.
Amanda, would you mind repeating the question? I'm like wrapped up in Chelsea and Otter's things that I want to see if I can come back to, yeah, where my brain's at with it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no answer. Like Potter
Yeah.
said, it's very individualized, but I'm just curious, like, I just know I've struggled and mentees have struggled with like how much of this is like my fault and like how much choice do I have because this is a mental disorder. So like it shouldn't be my fault because other mental disorders, like we don't say it's like, oh, your fault. If you would just go do this, you'd be fine. If you just go like eat, you just like don't throw up, like you're fine. So it's like how much of this is like a disease versus how much do we actually have to sometimes make a really hard choice and be really uncomfortable. Because I think there's already so much self-blame that we have and we're so hard on ourselves. And that makes recovery even harder because we're trying to do it perfectly. And if we don't make that choice, well, then we failed. But it's also a mental disorder. So
Yeah.
it's kind of okay.
Fabulous. Thank you for realigning. Yeah, I think I brought this up before, but my mom struggled with an eating disorder too throughout like my like adolescent years, and like I watched her engage with her like eating disorder. And before developing my own eating disorder, I very much was on the side of like just eat, just stop doing these things, just do these things. Like my brain really like could not conceptualize. Part of that, I was a child, so I think that was also like really confusing for me to understand that someone's brain, like without understanding like what mental health was as a child, I was just like, well, this is what we do, so why aren't you doing it? And I did put like a lot of blame on my mom, which I still like work through the feelings of like guilt around. But like it really was hard for me to understand. And I try to always remember that with people that are like making comments like that to people that are struggling with eating disorders, that I'm like, oh, they really like are really struggling to understand what that could be like for their brain to be telling them the opposite of what like that person's brain is telling them to do around their hunger cues or around food. So I really have like a lot of compassion for like that space of just like lack of understanding. And there's no like space in, I guess, I don't want to use definitives, but like saying that like, yeah, eating disorders are not a choice. And I think there is a strength of some people's eating disorders where I do think there needs to come in some additional support of being like, hey, we think that like your eating disorder is much stronger and we want to be able to get you some additional help to be able to like give you relief and to like give you permission to heal, because we don't think that your brain is going to let you do that. And realizing that that's like the illness is strong. It's not the person's choice whether they want to get help or not. I think it really is like, how long has the eating disorder been around and calling the shots? And does that person feel like they can fight back against that and be able to make a decision for their like long-term well-being? Because I think that like the longer that I've seen some people's eating disorders and like the strength of them, not even with length of time, but just like the strength of some eating disorders, I do think that having additional like pieces of support brought in is necessary. And I struggle with that, even being someone who's like, I very much want everything to be like voluntary. I want everyone to reach that place of like motivation to say like, I want to make changes. And also eating disorders are incredibly like vile illnesses that will not allow that to be a choice sometimes. I like to say that like, for the most part, again, depending on where someone's eating disorder strength is at, like recovery choices can be choices that we can make. The illness, 100% not a choice, not something that anyone chose for themselves of saying, this is how I'm going to cope and make it through my life. And I think that like leaning into saying like, I do have choice that I can make regarding recovery, regarding spending time with community, regarding reaching out and setting up that time for a meal. Yeah, I like to bring in the power of choice because I think that it can help people feel like less stuck. And I think that helped me feel less stuck, was saying that like I can make a decision in this and I don't have to just be the eating disorder is my voice. I'm not sure how succinct that was. I was very aware at the time.
No, I think that's pretty good. And I think you've brought it back. I mean, as I was listening to you, Lydia, to a sense of agency, and
Yes.
the illness itself can feel really disempowering and make you feel like, but treatment sometimes feels that way too, like you've got this illness and it's happening to you, or like, I don't, some of even the books around eating disorders is like this. And I think, recognizing that nobody woke up one day and went, God, I'd really just like to suffer with an eating disorder for years. Nobody does that. But you do, even being here today, that was a choice you made. The small, maybe a small act of kindness for yourself and for your recovery, but of just showing up and listening and being in community and taking that information. So I'm really happy you were all here today. I loved being with my friends from EDF and from Amanda, from EBT, and Otter and Lydia, and just loved seeing any familiar faces in the audience. So Lydia and I are meeting in November to plan the next year of how we recover events. So we will be back. And we will have a recording of this. I started this one a little bit late. So if you're watching the recording, I'm so sorry I cut off the first part of our meeting, but I promise most of the good stuff is right here in the session. But yeah, thank you all for being here. And EDF is available for support. EBT is available support all through the tough holiday times. We've got events and courses and support groups. So come and see us. Yeah, we'll see you again in the new year.
Yes, thank you, everyone. So great to see everyone here. Otter, Amanda, Chelsea, I love hearing perspectives and really hearing from like across the span of different folks' experiences, I think is what like helps me continue having hope in recovery, of saying like, yeah, we're all going to do it so differently and there's no right way. And I think really like my hope with these spaces is always to break that down of like, there's not a right way and a wrong way to do it. We just want to talk about this to let people know we can do it and we don't have to do it alone.
Just begin again.
Yes.
Right.
I love that. All right. So great to see everyone. Have fabulous
Thanks,
days.
everyone.
Sending
Thanks,
everyone
everyone.
my best wishes. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.